Today I want to show you how to make an improvisational flower using your scrap fabrics. Hi, I'm Kim Jamison Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use an improv technique to make a sort of like a rose, an improv rose if you will. Now there's different ways to do this, and the improv technique I'm using is sort of like making a log cabin. You're kind of going around and adding different rounds of fabric. So if you don't know how to do that, I actually have a video that shows you how to do that, so check up above or in the description below because I'll put a link to that video. But the idea for what I'm doing today is actually to make the flower, which is kind of the purple pinks you see in the center there, with the background at the same time. And you're going to actually be making a quilt block. This one is not squared up yet. I'm going to show you how to do that in this video as well. But I got the idea from this book called Crumb Quilts by Emily Bailey. Now, I did a review on this book. Absolutely love her ideas for using scrap fabric or crumb pieces to make the different projects in this book. So again, check up above or in the description below for a link where you can find that book review. But the project she made in here that got me thinking is this particular one here. This is called Wonky Rose, okay, because that's kind of what it looks like. So you can see here she's got all these blocks and she constructs them with the background attached to the rose, if you will, okay? So rather than making a separate little rose and then appliquing it on the background, she is actually making it all in one block, and then she's going to trim it up to a certain size. They're all the same size, of course. And in this particular project, she has different background colors. You can see there's some green with the yellow and the magentas and the red roses. And then she also has the same color centers of the roses with a different background with blues. So it's really quite interesting. She's got sashing to divide those blocks up because you kind of need that when you're using all these scrap fabrics together because it can be a little overwhelming otherwise and you wouldn't even see the blocks necessarily. So I looked at this and I thought, well, this is really interesting, so I want to try this technique and see how that works out for me. So that's what I want to show you in today's video. So here is the one block I was showing you that I had done. Now the thing is, when you make these, they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So before you start, it's probably a good idea to decide what size of block you want to end up with because you have to trim this down afterwards. So you need to make sure that you're making your block bigger because you're going to trim it down, right? So for example, if I want to make a 9.5 inch block, my block has probably got to be 10.5 inches, at least 10. 10's probably not big enough, probably at least 10.5. Because of how this goes, you're going to have to, you know, it's not straight at all. It's not square at all. So you might be cutting off quite a bit in different areas. So you need to make sure it's not at least an inch or more bigger so that you can trim it down to the appropriate size. Now, when I made this particular block, I started with a center piece. You're going to start with a little piece in the center. And this particular one is, I chose a yellow, bright yellow, as kind of the center of the rose. And then I went around it with 3, I believe, rounds here. In the book she tells you to do, I think, a couple. So what I wanted to do today is I want to show you one that I've started the center on it here. Okay, here's my center. There's my little piece in the center. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. And you have to trim as you go along. And I wanted to just keep it to this because I want this block to be smaller. Okay, this block here, they very quickly get fairly large. Okay, so I wanted to start with a smaller piece in the center, a smaller, thinner strips as I went around. And then I'm going to next add I've chosen green fabrics. Here's my fabrics I've chosen to be the background for this particular center. And so I want you to wait until the end of the video because make sure you don't leave too soon because I'm going to show you or tell you some tips to make sure that this block technique is successful because there's some things you need to know about these outer pieces that will be really, really helpful for you, okay? But before we get to that, I want to go to the sewing machine and show you how I attach these, how that process works as I go around as I'm putting this last background layer onto this particular project. Before I go to the sewing machine, I wanted to point out something to you. If you look below the video, you'll see there's a heart with a $sign in it. And that's your opportunity to support the Chatterbox Quilts channel with a donation. So you can do that to show your appreciation for the videos I produce, and that helps me to buy tools and fabric and treats for my cats that keep this channel going. Thank you so much. Okay. So I've got my little rose in the center here. Which doesn't look so much like a rose, but you know, we're going to go with it anyway. And then I want to start adding my background pieces, which are green, around the outside. So I'm going to take my first piece here, and this is the top here. So I'm going to be lining up and stitching along this edge here. So I'm just going to put it along here. I know I've got extra fabric. That's perfectly fine. And we're just going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam along here. And I want to make sure that I'm stitched right off into that background piece. And I'm going to open it up, and I can either press it, but since I'm at my machine, I'm just going to use my Violet Craft seam roller to press it open there. And then I need to do some cutting because I cannot put the rest of the pieces on here. This is my next side. We're going in this kind of a counterclockwise rotation. I can't do that with all this hanging out, can I? So I need to trim it up. So I'm going to take my rotary cutter and do that. Just bring up my cutting mat here. That's my little Martelli 12-inch square cutting mat. It's really handy for things like this. And get one of their rulers too. And I'm just going to line it up with this side. Actually, I'm going to flip it over. That makes it a little bit easier, right? Okay, because I'm going to line it up with that edge. Okay, line up my ruler with that edge, and I'm just going to cut up until it cuts off this piece of fabric. All right. So now when I flip that over, this is what I've got, and I'm just going to leave that for now. I'm not doing anything there. So here's our little triangular looking shape. We seem to be going with triangles in this block for some reason, even though the center starts with 4 sides. Just what happens sometimes. Okay, let's go to the next one, okay? This is the next piece. These are batik, so I don't even have to think about the right or wrong side on these. But we're going to just line that up. Make sure I'm doing this. Yes, we're going this direction. 1, 2. I often have to think about this a bit. It's not a hard technique, but for some reason, there is a bit of thinking required on my part anyway. Okay. All right. So we've got this one here, and I'm always pressing out towards the most recently added piece. Press down, and then we want to cut that piece off as well. Okay, so we've got a couple places to cut this one off. So let's see here. We've got this side to cut a little bit. And then of course we have to cut this side. So we'll just line it up along there. And you can change the angle at this point in time if you want a little bit. You know, if I wanted to take it in a little bit closer, I could have done that. Okay, and that's what we're doing so far. And now we're moving along to this side, and we're going to grab the next piece of fabric to do that. Okay, it's this particular one here. And I'm going to line it up here. And more stitching. All right, here's this one. I'm going to open that up. And we're going to cut that off. Okay, now, before I cut this off, let's take a closer look at this little guy here, because we have 2 sides, right? We're going to cut it off on that side. You can see this isn't even lining up properly here. So when I go to make this cut, I would definitely have to be looking at some new angle going along like this kind of a thing or something like that. But even more importantly, when I look at this side of it, you can see that if I was trying to cut this off, I've got no fabric there at all. But not to worry, because we've got lots of extra fabric here, and we're actually going to be trimming it down in the next, the final stage. So I'm not going to worry about that now. However, if you are on the inside doing that, you have to make sure that when you are lining up your fabric or adding your fabric, that there's enough that you'll be able to cut. So you can see here that, you know, there wouldn't be in this situation. But because this is my last round, I'm going to be trimming it down. I'm not too worried about that at this stage. Okay, we have one more to put on here. This is our last one here to put on. Now remember I mentioned that things are not looking so good here because I haven't trimmed yet, right? Let's trim that up. And we're going to trim this up, making sure that we can go across. So like if I was lining this up here, then, you know, there's no pink fabric underneath there. I can't do that. So I need to make sure that I'm coming down through that pink fabric and out at the end. Trim that all the way up. Oops, got a little bit of a catch there. That's where my seam is, so that's not surprising. All right, so now we are ready to add the last green strip, which is this one here. These are actually offcuts, these particular ones from a previous project that I did, which, you know, I guess all your scraps are, aren't they? Now I'm going to make sure I leave an extra room here at the top and bottom here, so that'll all work properly. Okay, let's go in here. Okay, last one. Boy, that little part in the center is looking pretty small, isn't it? Don't worry, that will change when we trim things up. All right, so we've got this all here. And I am actually not going to do any trimming at this point in time. I'm going to leave this because I said we are going to trim this down. These are the final ones to put in. And then we're going to trim it down to a smaller block. So I don't need to do anything on this last one here because that'll be taken care of in the next step. So here's my block. So it's not complete yet though, but it's kind of getting there. So you can see that it is not a square. I need it to be a square, which means I need to trim it down. All right. So let's talk about how we're going to do that, okay? Because trying to figure out, you know, how to do this with my regular acrylic rulers could be a bit of a nightmare. But I have a solution. I am going to use my Martelli square fussy cut windows, and that's really going to help me. I know I'm not fussy cutting, but I want to make sure that I can see that rose either in the center, center-ish, or, you know, I want to make sure I know where to cut here. And this makes it really, really easy, actually. So I can take this template, I'm going to trim it to a 6.5 inch block. So I can take this template and I can play around with it on the project to see where I want this to be. And you have to make sure you've got enough fabric on the inside, right? You can see, like, you know, if I had it over like this, you can see I don't have fabric there. That's not going to work. But you could trim it on an angle if you're able to do that. So it depends on what you're working with, how much fabric you have. In this particular case, I'm going to be able to get this 6.5 inch about, yeah, starting about there. So I can see how much green, what green I want to have, you know, if I want to move it down to see more of this, less of this, whatever I want to do. I am just going to not overthink it, which is what I always do. We're just going to lay it down, make sure that I've got fabric inside that border. And then I'm going to take one of my no-slip square templates. These come in sets, by the way. These both come in sets from 6.5 to 9.5. There are smaller ones too, but this is what I'm using here. And I'm just going to put that no-slip template in the center, put my hand on it as I take that off, and then this is where I'm actually going to cut. So I can now take my cutter, cut up, and because it has that no-slip backing that sticks to that fabric, I can just do this. I know that I'm going to get nice clean cuts there, and those can be put aside for another project, another crumb project. And there's my little block. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use for one of my blocks if I continue to make that project. Okay, that's one of the ones. Now, remember I had this other one as well with the blue, and you can see that it needs to be trimmed down too. Now, I don't want this to be a 6.5 inch block because I got a lot more fabric going on in this because I did a whole bunch more in the center for the rose. So it's obviously not going to be with that particular project. And I want to see what is the biggest size that I can use and get a square out of this, all right? So here's my 9.5 inch one, and I could do that. I'd have to be careful, and it probably wouldn't be, that might be square, but there's not much down this corner, right? So I got to be a little careful. But that would actually work, and I could do a 9.5 inch one because I have that template too. And I can just put it in the center there. Just get it in there, get it down, take off the window, and we're going to trim this down. Not sure I got this guy off very well. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. So here's my little one here. Okay, now remember at the start of the video I told you I was going to give you a tip, at least one tip, to make this successful. And this is why I was trimming this down, because I wanted to show you. You can see what's happening here. This is coming away because we've actually gone right into the seam allowance. We've cut so close there. And that's because I did not leave enough fabric on the edge. So you noticed probably when I was making this particular block that I had these big pieces of fabric. They were much wider when I added them on. That last row, So you should make sure that the last row of fabric that you add on, and you can see these two were not, okay, these two were not wide enough, because when you're doing the trimming happens on those final pieces. So you need to make sure they're the nice big chunky ones, even if you're cutting a bunch of them off, as we did with some of them. Like you can see how some of this, is still pretty wide that we cut off. But that's okay, because it makes sure that I don't have any issues like this happening. So even though this is 9.5 inches, guess what? I'm probably going to trim it down more, because, I can't do much with this, can I? That's not going to work very well in the project. But it gives you an idea, at least, of what it looks like if you have a center and you have several rounds before you put your background on. Or if you just have one round, I kind of like him to go like this. I don't know why, but it doesn't matter which way it goes. But there's just the one round there, and then I put the background on. So there's my little flower that would go in that particular project. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to share it with your quilting friends. And remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And before you go, check out these other videos I've included just for you. For more helpful quilting information, please go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.